Right, good afternoon everybody. It's nice to see you. It's a nice day here. After the rain, I realise some places in the country are still having these flash floods, but I hope you're okay where you are. Welcome to our webinar this afternoon, and we're looking at the role of culture and particularly focusing in Christianity and thinking still about our theme of religious literacy. So just take you through a few housekeeping things if you've not been here before. If you can see me, that's great. But below me, there's a box where you can write in any questions that you would like to ask during this live webinar. So please make use of that. Also, you'll see a link to a PowerPoint presentation that you can click on and open. You don't have to be looking at me, you can just be listening and writing your own notes onto that PowerPoint slide. But as I know, many of you have already printed it out and will probably have it to make notes on as we go through. So we've been looking particularly this year at the role of religious literacy for society and the importance that we have for young people to become religiously literate, to be able to cope with not only the world that they encounter and society that they encounter in the UK, but also as global citizens. So these webinars are put on by Interfaith Explorers, and please explore the rest of the website. There's lots of really good materials there for you to be able to use in your classrooms to help children talk about religious issues with confidence. And for you as a teacher, these webinars exist to able or help you, to support you to be able to have those discussions with pupils. Research shows that often teachers shy away from challenging issues, and RE is full of potentially challenging issues. So these webinars exist to try and help support you, whether you're primary or secondary, to feel more confident about leading these discussions and helping pupils with their learning. So the programme is supported by UNESCO and is here to help support PSHE, RE and citizenship. So my name is Claire Clinton, and I'm a secondary school teacher first of all in RE, and for a long time now I've been an RE advisor. I still enjoy teaching, whether that's down in nursery or reception, all the way through primary and up through secondary into A-level. And I feel like I've got the best job in the world because I get to do my subject every day in different ways. So, Religious Literacy, Commission on Religion and Public Life, has said the potential for misunderstanding and stereotyping and oversimplification based on ignorance is huge within our society. And schools have a big part to play in putting this right. So it's really important that we're producing pupils who can cope well and adapt well and contribute positively to life in modern Britain. So today, our session objectives is we want to get you to understand a little bit more about different Christian denominations, but also how culture has a part to play in those, and how you can offer practical activities as well as discussions to help pupils through sometimes new learning about others and also about their own faith. So if you have a look in the PowerPoint, you'll find a slide with a picture of a tree. And this comes from a book that I put together with a number of very good RE colleagues. I learned early on, never do anything on your own. It's always much better if you work in a team. Anyway, this is a simple diagram from my book, Religion in Focus on Christianity. And it just shows you those different branches of Christian faith, so that for the first 1,000 years, you can see on there that there was one church. There were not different denominations, so there weren't Roman Catholic Christians and Orthodox Christians or Protestant Christians. There was just the Christian church. And actually, when the Christian church first started, they weren't called Christians, they were called the Way. And this goes back to a saying that Jesus said on earth about being the way, the truth, and the life. And so the first title for those Jewish people who felt that Jesus was the Messiah, and so first of all, they're thought of as a sect of Judaism. And so they're called the Way, and then later on they have this title of Christians, which means little Christ, follower of Christ. And Christ is the Greek word for Messiah, and Messiah is the Hebrew word for this person, this king who was going to come and restore the fortunes of Israel that all the Jews were looking for about the time when Jesus was born. And for modern Jews today, somebody they're still looking for to come back and put right the world, for the world to be as God intended it. So these roots are coming from the life of Jesus, and the branches are how people have interpreted it across centuries. So as I say, there was this one church for the first 1,000 years, and then you begin to see after that differences coming up, and groups going in different directions. And this is particularly around theology, around beliefs about God, and also to do with practice. So I hope that diagram helps you. There's another one on the next slide, which just begins to sort of show you where sort of those sort of breaks have happened in a different way, more linear, that diagram. So I hope one of those will sort of help you to see. So to put this in context of the world at the moment, sort of Christian population is expected to carry on growing in the world. So there you can see it will be nearly 3 billion people by 2015, which sounds a long way away, but will soon appear. And nearly 1 in 3 people worldwide are expected to be Christian by that time. So it's about 1/3 of the world's population. So that's very large, a large group of people, but not all of them are doing and believing exactly the same things. As in any religion, there are main tenets, main beliefs that are shared, but then these smaller things are worked out in different ways, and we'll talk more about that. We've put down there a report that came out in 2011 about global Christianity. And the share of the world's population, Christian population, in sub-Saharan Africa is expected to grow from 24% to 38%. So you can see there's a really large growth going on within Africa. But also you can see for us in Europe, expecting the Christian population there to fall. So the borough where I live and work is Newham, and we have very large populations that come from all sorts of places in the world. And so here, it's much more likely that you find somebody who is maybe African and Christian than white British and Christian. Of course, those exist here, those people exist here. But just from that report, you can see the influence even having within our own country, that by having people from other places, sometimes that means that that religion is coming into the country, and that can have a different practice from the sort of cultural practices of traditional Christians within the UK or across Europe. Okay, so you've got some projected figures on the next PowerPoint slide, which is just showing sort of the population of the world, and you can see it's pretty consistent from 2010 to 2015. And also looking then at that breakdown of these denominations. So as I said, there was one church, and sort of the 3 main types of Christian, Roman Catholic, Orthodox and Protestant. You can see the percentages they are of the entire population. So what's interesting is the Roman Catholic part of the church, though that's not so big in the UK, and that's all to do with Henry VIII and Reformation happening here. If you look to the world population of Christians, that sits at about 50% of all Christians will be from the Roman Catholic Church. But that isn't how it feels in this country. If you meet lots of Christians here, you're much more likely to meet Protestant Christians, Christians who come from Church of England churches, Methodist churches, Salvation Army churches, Baptist churches, Pentecostal churches, lots of different Protestant churches found in the UK. And Protestant churches sort of sit just under 40%, so still a big figure. And then the Orthodox Church sits at about 10% of those world figures for Christianity. So those three big branches represent most Christians. And so for us as teachers to know something about those three is really helpful. But obviously what we tend to know is what we know in our country about them. And what I learned quite early on in my Christian life was that going to different places, the church may have the same name, but can have very different ways of doing things. More of that later. Okay, so why did these denominations occur? What happened for these schism that happened? What happened for that to take place? Well, it was around a theological concept of the Trinity, which hopefully you've heard of. And for Christians, there's this idea of God being one and three persons. So the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And the discussion was all around whether all of these three people were equal, or whether the Father figure within the Trinity was first amongst equals. Now, the Bible talks about the Trinity. There's a number of places in the New Testament where Trinity is there. You won't find the word Trinity there, but you will find the concepts, the examples of it. So one example that Christians would talk about would be the baptism of Jesus, which is at the start of his ministry. And as he's being baptized, there is a voice from heaven. The Father says, "This is my Son whom I love." And you have the Holy Spirit descending upon Jesus, anointing him for the start of his ministry in the form of a dove. So you've got the three there. And there's other points in the Bible where, for instance, in Genesis, at the start, God doesn't say, shall I make man in our image? It says, shall we? And there's this conversation that happens between the we. And so Christians do believe in one God. They don't believe in multiple gods. They're not polytheistic, but they do believe in something that's just mind-blowingly impossible to understand, which is that this Trinity is made up of three parts. So that's one, but it's three. So two bishops, quite important bishops, Bishop of Rome and the Bishop of Constantinople, which is modern day Istanbul, disagree with one another about the Trinity. One of them thinks all parts of the Trinity are equal. The other one thinks the Father is first amongst equal. And ultimately, they couldn't resolve this debate, this discussion that they were having. Now, maybe today they would have done because they lived in very separate places, and it took a long time for any communication to travel between Rome and Constantinople and back again. People didn't meet up very often. So I would like to think in the 21st century this could have been resolved in some way. But back then, in 1055, what happened was that they both excommunicated each other, basically said, you're wrong, we're right, this is our thinking within this part of the church and the community around, this is what we believe wholeheartedly, we're not willing to compromise on this, this is really important to us, and therefore if you can't accept it, then we're not sure that you're properly Christian. So we're going to separate ourselves from you, and we're going to call ourselves, well, the Roman Catholic Church obviously called itself that, and Catholic with a big C means one and true. So the bishop in Rome called himself, you know, in his church, the one true Christian church. Meanwhile, the bishop in Constantinople, modern day Istanbul, calls himself the Orthodox Church, the true, the unchanging, you know, church. So they both come up with these little titles to call. Now, on most things, they're in absolute agreement. They agree about the creation of the world. They agree Jesus being God's son, the incarnation, his death. They agree about his teachings scripturally. They agree on the canon of scripture. There's lots of things that they agree on, but this is the one thing that they don't agree on. So what does this tell us about sort of culture and Christianity? Yeah, I suppose that religion really does matter to people, and something that may seem small and insignificant when you look from the outside, when you're within it, may seem very, very significant and very, very important. So this split happens really over a very small issue, not on big fundamental issues about the second coming and heaven and hell and salvation. They're in agreement on all of those things. It's very small, fine detail that they're in disagreement about. So this also tells us that religions really want to get things right, and people who are helping to lead and take their faith forward, yes, they're serious about it, but they want to get things right. And actually, what they're having to do to get those things right is they're having to interpret Bible passages. So they're having to read sacred texts, and they're going to have to look at a theme or an idea and interpret it. And so the bishop in Rome has one interpretation of these different passages about the Trinity, and the bishop in Constantinople has a different one. So they're both using the same sources, they're both reading the same things, but they're reading it in different ways, they're interpreting it in different ways. And so what we have to understand as teachers, that in every religion this is ongoing. Christians are no different from Muslims or Hindus or Sikhs or Buddhists or non-religious worldviews like humanism. People are interpreting words of others, sacred texts, and trying to work out what that means for their time in their culture. Now, if you want the posh word for this in Christian theology, you talk about hermeneutics, okay? And that's what this study is about, is about looking at then what does something that was written 2,000 years ago mean in present day context. So, as we've mentioned, there are these three main groups making up sort of 99% of all Christians in the world. And these denominations are dominant in different parts of the world. So, as I've mentioned already, in the UK, you tend to find Protestant Christians. They're called Protestant because they were Roman Catholic Christians who were protesting against the Roman Catholic Church. And some parts of the Roman Catholic Church 500 years ago, these particular priests did not feel were living a true Christian life. And so they protested. They felt there were reforms that needed to happen in the Roman Catholic Church to get it back to the original message of Jesus. So in one sense, if they had been successful with that, then the Protestant church wouldn't have come into existence. But because there were other people within the Roman Catholic Church who didn't agree with those reforms, therefore, that's where the split happens. So the Protestants come from protesting. They were the ones that were protesting. And a big thing of that was about authority and who has authority to say what the Bible means, this hermeneutics. And Protestant Christians were saying, that they felt that individuals could have a relationship with God and God could reveal his will to them. So it was really important that they could learn to read. It was really important that the Bible was translated into English and or whatever language people speak, so that it is understandable to them, that they don't have to go through a priest to get to God. There's something called the priesthood of all believers, that every person can be a priest and have that relationship with God. You don't need somebody in authority to do that. Whereas other Christians, Roman Catholic Church at this particular point, was emphasizing the fact that actually just because you translated something and just because you hand something to someone doesn't mean that they have the skills to interpret it correctly. Actually, it's very possible to misread passages. There's a bit in the Bible where it talks about Judas going out and hanging himself. So you could open the Bible up and you could read, go out and hang. He went out and hung himself. And then you could open the Bible somewhere else and it could say, go and do likewise, because that's another phrase in the Bible. So these Roman Catholic priests were saying, actually, it's that isn't enough. Yes, of course, you can have a relationship with God, yes. But actually what you do need is you do need some experts. You need people who have scholarship and training and understand these things and could discuss these things and work these things out. And ultimately, the way that you understand what the Bible has to say is the chief priest or the bishop of Rome is the person who'll tell us what it's saying. So, as I say, you find a lot of Protestant churches in this country, and the Baptist Church is actually slightly older than the Church of England. The Baptist Church starting with the Anabaptists in Germany, and the Church of England starting here with Henry VIII. Again, when he was wanting a divorce, which the Roman Catholic Church would not grant him. But there were many priests in this country at that time, not in agreement with what Henry VIII wanted to do, the divorce, but were wanting this separation from Rome, and so backed him as a way of being able to see of getting away from sort of Roman Catholic control. But if we went over to Italy, we would find it's very, very different. In Italy, you would find it's predominantly Roman Catholics in that country. Or if we went over to South America, if we went to Peru or Argentina, again, you would find that's predominantly Roman Catholic. And if we were to go to Russia, then you would find most of the churches there are Orthodox. So often different countries have a particular tradition between these three, and it's usually tied in with history and trade routes as to how one particular church got to a particular place. So having said that, we've got these three main denominations, but actually within these denominations, you have different flavors of Christians. So people will interpret and read the Bible in different ways. And we often talk about these being liberal, conservative, and fundamentalist. Fundamentalist, not in the American sense, but in the sense of being a little bit more literal with their interpretation of the Bible. So most Christians would say it's important to look at the context and not just the words. And most Christians will do a level of interpretation, but it's the how much they do that they may disagree with one another. So for instance, I've put in a passage from the Bible there where Jesus talks about if your eye causes you to sin, it's better to gouge it out and throw it away. So I don't know about you, but I don't see many one-eyed Christians walking around. So I would say it's pretty obvious that most Christians interpret these words rather than take them literally. So even a fundamentalist, somebody who wants to say that every word in the Bible is God-inspired and is his way of communicating with us as human beings, is not taking that passage literally. They're interpreting it. So what do they do in order to decide how to interpret something? Well, they'll be looking at what style of language is being used. So one of the things 2,000 years ago Jewish teachers did was use a literary style called hyperbole, and that was a way of taking something to an extreme to illustrate your point, and it was never meant to be taken literally, and Jesus uses these quite a lot. So for instance, that you take the plank of wood out of your own eye before you take the speck of wood out of someone else's. The point being, be more concerned about yourself and what's wrong with you than pointing out somebody else and what they're doing being wrong. So the point of this passage about plucking your eye out is about taking sin seriously for Christians. You don't want to not get to heaven because you haven't dealt with something seriously. But it's not a literal passage that Christians go around cutting off hands and gouging out eyes, because, yes, there would be nothing left of them if they did that. So Christians are looking at what sort of book or language things are being written in. So there are poetry books in the Bible, there are history accounts in the Bible, there are biographies in the Bible, and there are apocalyptic literature, which is all about end times and uses a lot of metaphor and image, and again, not meant to be taken literally. So if you don't know the style of the passage, you could misinterpret it in a sense. So knowing the context, knowing how these things are used 2,000 years ago are really important. And that's just as true for any other religion and any other sacred text. So I've put the next slide, a few more passages, and these are ones to do with women in the Bible, and that's often an area of controversy for some Christians. The Church of England, the Anglican Church, has just passed that women can become bishops. So it was 1996, I think, when women first became priests. Don't quote me on that, that's off the top of my head, remembering that. So it's taken a while, from 20 years, 10 years? Yes, 20 years, to see that ability for women to become priests. Whereas in the Roman Catholic Church, you still haven't got a woman able to become a priest. So different churches interpret some of these things in different ways. So I'm starting with an Old Testament passage there, talking about a woman must not wear men's clothing, nor a man wear woman's clothing. Now, what's interesting about that in terms of culture is, of course, you've got to go back and look at what did women wear and what did men wear, 5,000 years BC, before you can interpret, well, what is women's clothing and what is men's clothing? And so what it's not talking about is, it's not talking about women's UK clothing in 2016 or men's UK clothing in 2016. So it's reading passages, understanding a faith, means that you need to know something about the context before you can read a text correctly. The next one is obviously in English, translation from the Greek. I do not permit a woman to teach or have authority over a man. She must be silent. Now, the word there actually isn't silent, it's that she must stop gossiping. And again, if you go back 2,000 years, and think about who Paul, in this particular instance, is writing to, is a young man who is a recent convert and is setting up a new church in a new area of Asia Minor. And most of the people coming to that new church are going to be Jewish Christians. And at that time, women would go to synagogue. And synagogue isn't a place of worship, it's a meeting place. Your worship happens in your home. It's not about going particularly for a service, but being together as a community. And what the women spent most of their time doing at synagogue was catching up with one another. So instead of this teaching about women being silent and not able to speak in church, actually it is talking about women to be silent, to not stop gossiping. But it's so that they can learn, so that they can understand this new faith they've come into. And actually, it's saying that there's a new faith, and actually you need to have a new culture and not just carry on the old ways. So actually knowing a little bit about the context, knowing a little bit about the actual Greek words, because each Greek word has to be translated into English, it's really important. And the last passage is another statement by Paul, who was a Jewish convert, and he talks about Eunice. And Eunice is a female word, and as you can see, he talks about her being an apostle. An apostle is somebody similar to a bishop, somebody who plants churches, looks after an area of Christians within it. So here's Paul in one passage. He said, I don't want women in authority. Here's another passage where he's speaking up a woman who is an apostle, similar to him, doing a similar role. So there's many Christians who don't know that Eunice is a female name. It's a Greek female name. There's no example of it ever being given to a man. It's female in its root, and it's female here in the Greek. But if you didn't know that, if you didn't know the context, if you didn't know the Greek, then you could just read that as if, well, maybe that's a man there. And so because of what's happened in another passage, you wouldn't be able to have the debate, to be able to think about it. And so that's what different Christians do, is they have these debates around the culture and around the interpretation. And going back to learn the Hebrew and Greek is really important. So moving on from that, so what's this telling us? Well, it's telling us that culture is really important. Because actually, if you didn't know about synagogues at the time, maybe Paul's message to Timothy sounds quite hardline and putting down of women. Whereas when you begin to know the culture, actually he's trying to teach the women. He's trying to get them so they understand their faith and can go out and witness to other people and actually tell the story. So if we look in terms of culture and Christian culture, just a few examples that I know. One, I can remember going to Italy and trying to go into a cathedral without my lower legs covered, without my lower arms covered, and without a head covering, and I wasn't allowed in. And because I wasn't a great frequenter of cathedrals in this country, but I knew I'd been into cathedrals, and it probably wouldn't have been a problem to go in with what I was wearing. I didn't feel I was inappropriately dressed. But actually in that culture, that was inappropriate. And would still be the same today in Italy. Or for example, in Syria, when you go into a church there, often you take off your shoes, which some people in this country would only think of as maybe a Muslim or a Hindu practice, a Buddhist practice or a Sikh practice. But actually it's a Middle Eastern practice. It's part of culture coming from there. Or, for instance, Caribbean Christians wearing hats into church, again, coming from their culture. So none of these things are particularly coming from the Bible. The Bible talks about modestly dressing, but it doesn't say what is modest and what isn't modest. It talks about prayer and coming together for worship, but it doesn't say whether you should have shoes on or not, or whether you should be wearing a hat in church. And again, that's coming from that Middle Eastern culture where men and women, when you went to pray, always put a covering over their head as a sign of respect before God, that you would not enter God's presence as such, talk with God without showing that sign of respect. And so some Christians have kept things like that, whereas other Christians have said, well, in the 21st century, we don't really do that to show respect. I don't really put a hat on to show respect to somebody. There may be other ways that we do that. And so, yeah, that's why there are these differences. It's often said that you don't recognise culture until you come up against someone else's. And so Christians often don't recognise their Christian culture until they meet with others. And so within my church that I go to, it's very lots of people from all around the world and from lots of different denominations. And what's interesting there is that sometimes some of the Roman Catholic Christians from Africa come into my church, which is a more modern church. and feel very, very at home because it's like their Catholic church in Africa. Whereas when they've been to a Catholic church here, they've found it quite different. And so even within these denominations, there are different flavours and different ways of doing things. So why are we telling you all this information? Well, we're telling you all this information so you're a bit more confident with handling questions and talking with pupils. Because what you might find sometimes is that when religion comes up, the person who's making a comment may make a very unreflective comment or a very, very strong comment. Absolute and strong attitudes that this is right and this is wrong. And often children are repeating what adults have said to them. And then they may make judgments in other ways that seem logical but aren't necessarily true. So how do we handle this as teachers? Well, we need to make sure that in our classrooms we've taught our school's values to our children and they understand that. But also remember, any question or any thought that comes up, you can always go to your mentor or your manager to talk these things through. And you don't want to ever feel as if you're on your own in these things. Always go and check things out, because there's nothing bad about not knowing the answer. All we're going to do is we're going to add it into our bag of knowledge and we'll be able to use it at another point. So the next few slides just talk about sort of handling diverse views and situations in the classroom. So it's good to affirm everyone's contribution, even when you don't agree with it, but allow for that range of answers and make sure that you correct factually incorrect material. And if you're not sure about what they're saying, do a bit of research, follow it up, find out whether it's factually right or not. And then that allows you to give the other view. If that's not come up in the classroom, that's our role as teachers, is to balance things. And also that we want to illustrate to children that culture does affect our understanding and it impacts the way we see things. And so whether your school is monocultural or multicultural, it's really important that different views and ideas come in and help children to move on in their thinking. So don't expect children to change big views immediately. It will take time. But actually in time they will get better at handling difference and understanding the relationship between culture and religion. And actually the more they find out, particularly at Key Stage 2, about different people and different people's beliefs, that will help them really to understand, and to understand that they may have this view but other people within their own faith may disagree with them. And really make sure that there's enough time to look at any issue. Find time, make time, so that things and ignorance, stereotypes can be unpacked and dealt with correctly. So finding time, I know, is difficult, but again, that's where you go and talk to other people. There's ways in which you can combine things sometimes to find some extra time. So we're saying all of that because we strongly believe here at Interfaith Explorers that having these discussions really help pupils to move from tolerance to respect. So not just putting up with people, but really being able to understand people. And if we want to have a society where people can be themselves as well as treat others well, it's important that they learn these skills at school. So curiosity is a great thing. We don't want to kill it off. We want to give time to it and allow children to explore and understand things. And it's important for us as educationalists that we keep up to date with new information and also ensure that we are becoming better at understanding different faiths and different religions. Okay, so that's taken us through. Just to say, there's a couple of things at the end of the PowerPoint slide where I've talked about some practical activities, and I've just put you in there a sort of quiz sheet which you could use yourself. Obviously don't look at the answers first, have a go and see if you can decide which denomination is true of which. But it may be a fun thing that you can do with staff in a staff meeting. Have a little 10-minute put, give them side one, and then reveal on your board the answers and see how well they understand Christianity. Ofsted has said time and time again that actually teachers need to get better at understanding Christianity. And I think there's something about maybe us in the past being a Christian country that we spent a lot of time learning about other religions, but actually we also need to get better at our own Christian faith. Okay, I am turning slightly sideways to see if we have any questions. We have one. Okay, so the question's just being scrawled. Yes, so if you have questions, having watched this and it's not live, you can still email them in and I will get those, and we will try our very hardest to give you some answers and some thoughts on those. I'm of the school of Plato, who encouraged questions. And as long as they're serious questions and not frivolous questions, of course, he said no question was ever a stupid question to ask if it was one that you really wanted to know the answer to. Okay, so a piece of paper I can see is almost at an end, which means that the question has been written. Okay, so how do you deal with tensions between pupils from different Christian traditions in class, giving that diversity? Well, absolutely. I think that's why it's so important that they understand something of there being lots of different denominations, lots of different groups, or these three main groups in Christianity, and also the things that they agree on. The Bible and Jesus' life, his death, resurrection. These are the key things that all Christians agree on. And as they get older, then we can begin to unpack some of these differences, different ways and different attitudes. And some of those are cultural. Some cultures really are not being disrespectful when they argue about something very strongly. That's just their cultural way of having a discussion. Whereas for maybe British people, that feels a lot more antagonistic, and we would not feel quite so happy. We feel a bit intimidated sometimes with other cultures that are more expressive around ideas. And so I think sometimes by unpacking cultures and understanding different ways of doing things, that helps pupils to identify who they are and in which culture they're feeling comfortable, and in turn then helps them to deal with the difference of others. So by understanding yourself, you're usually much better at being able to accept others. Joseph Rowntree research shows time and time again that for pupils and young people who feel secure in their own culture and in their own identity, these are the pupils, these are the young people who cope better with multiculturalism, cope better with diversity. They don't find that they've got to sort of hunch down and defend themselves against any ideas coming in. Actually, they know who they are, they know what's important to them, they understand what they should do and what they shouldn't do. Therefore, they're open and able to talk and understand others. So it's having time for these interfaith discussions is so important. Improving people's knowledge about themselves and their own culture is so important. And that's why I suppose Ofsted and the government have SMSC, spiritual, moral, social, cultural education, right in the centre of our school system. Because actually, if we do that well, we are preparing pupils for modern life. We're helping give them the tools to be able to navigate situations, whether that's at work or in society, to do that in a way where they can work with people, not against people. And that's beneficial to them, whatever their views and whatever they're thinking. Okay, so our time is up. Thank you very much for being with me, and we'll be back next month, and that will be our last webinar for this academic year. Yes, I hope report writing is near the end, and hopefully in July when I see you, we'll be feeling maybe a little less tired. Is that possible in teaching? I'm not sure. But anyway, thank you for your time today, and do email if there's any other questions you'd like to ask on this topic. Bye.